Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos daf kuf yud dalid. It takes us pretty close to the end of Perek ve'elu kisharim. There are two main topics of discussion for the daf. The first one is about stains on clothing, and the second one is about Yom Kippur and Shabbos, which is more holy, and are you allowed to do malacha for one on the other, preparing for one for the other, or doing something for one on the other? So the daf begins in the middle of a discussion about changing your clothing if it's dirty. It'll speak about proper dress for a Talmid Chacham. Then we will get to the subject of stains that form a chatzitza for tefillah and a mikvah. And then we'll go back to Talmidei Chachamim and describe the qualifications for being considered a Talmid Chacham relevant to certain halachos. We'll go back to clothing and discuss the fine clothing which was worn by rich people. So first of all, the Gemara says, this is Rav Acha says of Rav Yechanan, how do you know that you're supposed to have two sets of clothing in order to be able to wear nicer ones for special occasions? How do you know that midiraisa? Because it says about the big day kahuna, the clothing that Kohanim wore to do the avoda, they had a separate pair of clothing for Trumas Hadeshin, which is removing the ashes. And they had a different, fancier pair that they used for the other avodas. Why is that? Because you should not use the same clothing to cook a bowl of soup for your master as you use to pour him a glass of wine. Meaning this is more of a grungy, dirty avoda, and therefore they had special clothing that they should be used for that, so that the other clothing for the other avodas could be kept finer and cleaner. And then the Gemara says, it is disgrace for a Talmid Chacham to walk around in the street with patched shoes. Where it says, Rav Chanina did. Where it says, Rav Nachman says, no. The problem is only if you have multiple patches, a patch on top of a patch. You have one patch, it's not such a problem. Similarly, the Gemara says, it says, any Talmid Chacham that has a grease stain on his clothing is chayav misa, because it causes people to be repulsed by Talmidei Chachamim. And the pasuk says, "Kol misanai ahavu maves." You read it as "Kol masni'ai," all those who cause people to hate me, meaning Talmidei Chachamim who behave in a way which is not attractive to others, to the way of life, and therefore causes people to hate Torah study. That is ahavu maves. That causes a love of the death, meaning that they are chayav misa. Now, the Gemara had said that was talking about a grease stain, and the Gemara has a different version of this. It's Ravino who says it's not a grease stain, it's actually a stain of zera, of male seed. And the Gemara says it's not a contradiction, it depends where the stain is found. If it's on the outer clothing, there it's repulsive to have even a grease stain. If it's on the inner clothing, it's only repulsive to have a stain of zera, but otherwise it's not an issue. Now, the Gemara, on an interesting note here, wants to know, what does it mean when the pasuk describes that Yeshaya was Halach Avdi Yeshayo Arum V'Yachaf? What does it mean that he walked around naked and barefoot for 3 years? What, that can't be meant to be taken literally. The Gemara says it means that he had to wear old, worn out, torn clothing and worn out shoes that were patched up. Okay, now we go to the halachos of chatzitza. That is as follows: when you put an object on the mikvah to take its tumah off, it cannot have any interfering things stuck onto it. If it does have, the tevilah doesn't count if it's either a majority of the surface, or even if it's a minority, if it's something that you care about and you would want to remove it, you would not want that to stay there. Now the Gemara here is going to be quoting a Mishnah which defines things which you would want to remove. And we're going to have 3 or 4 different levels of cloth. So the lowest level is the blanket that's worn by an animal. A level above that is clothing which is worn by a boor, somebody who doesn't care too much about himself, but it is above that. And then above that, we have clothing which is worn by refined people, which the Gemara calls banayin, which we'll define later. That could be the 1 or 2 separate levels, as we shall see. So what is the halacha of all these things? So first of all, as far as the blanket, the Gemara, the Mishnah has a machlokes between Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that it's only a problem if you have a grease stain at least the size of an Italian coin called an iser. That's his opinion, and the Tanna Kama, who held that any size stain on the blanket is a problem. As far as clothing, So here the Mishnah doesn't specify whose clothing, which level, but it does have a machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Tanna Kama. Rabbi Yishmael says even if the stain is only visible on one side, it's a problem, it's something that bothers you, and the Tanna Kama says it has to be visible through and through to the other side. So Gemara asks, what would he say about the blanket? Does that also have to go through and through? And the Gemara says, well, we're going to figure that out. We don't know exactly, but we're going to figure that out by bringing in a quote from Rabbi Yossi, who explains what he meant by the one side, that he was talking about different levels of clothing. If it's the finer people, the banoim, then it's a problem if it's only on one side, and if it's a boor, the lower level individual, then it's only a problem if it goes through to both sides. So obviously the blanket can't be more finicky than that, and therefore the animal's blanket would also have to be a problem only if it goes through to both sides. The Gemara now asks, who are these banoim that have very refined standards for their clothing? So the Gemara has two answers. One is that it's Talmidei Chachamim, and the other is that it's special rich people who wear fancy clothing called uliyarin when they get out of the bath. Now the Gemara will discuss this one by one. First of all, as far as Talmidei Chachamim, we have a few statements from Rabbi Yochanan defining who counts as a Talmid Chacham as far as various halachos. So first of all, as far as this halacha, Talmid Chacham is somebody who is oisik v'binyanei shalayim. That's why he's called binyanim. They work on building the universe with their learning. Now, what about the halacha that you can return a lost object to a Talmid Chacham if he says he recognizes it, even if he cannot provide an actual sign, siman? So the Gemara says that's Talmid Chacham was careful not to wear his clothing inside out. Most run-of-the-mill people didn't care too much. What's a Talmid Chacham who could be appointed a leader on the congregation? So Rabbi Yochanan, there's two versions of this. Rabbi Yochanan, the first version is that somebody who asks him any halacha anywhere and he knows, even in Mesachas Kala. According to the second version, Rabbi Yochanan said he knows all the halachas as long as he's learning that Masechta now. If he's not learning that, then you can't expect him to know it. He has to have learned it, but you can't expect him to know it offhand, and he could still be a leader on the congregation. If, however, you want to appoint him to be Rosh Yeshiva, head of an entire yeshiva that applies even beyond his general area, then he should be somebody who can answer anywhere, even if he's not learning that right now. Next, Rabbi Yochanan says, who is the Talmid Chacham that you should be supporting, that the congregation should be providing him his bread? You don't have to provide luxuries, but bread you should give him so they should be able to learn. That's somebody who is not occupying himself with worldly matters, he's only occupying himself with heavenly matters. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the other explanation of Banan, which is rich people who were given special imported clothing from overseas when they got out of the bath. So the Gemara says, this clothing sounds like the way you're describing it was white. That's why they were careful not to get any stains on it. But I'll prove to you that it's not white. What's the proof? Because Rabbi Yanai told his children, when you bury me, don't put me in white clothing, lest I end up in hell, and then I'll be like a groom sitting amongst mourners. And don't give me black clothing, lest I end up in Gan Eden, and then I'll be like a mourner sitting amongst the grooms. So don't give me any of that. Give me clothing like these fancy clothings that comes from overseas. So obviously it was neither white nor black. It must have been red or some other color. So Gemara says it's not a problem. There's two layers. It's two layers. One of the layers, the outer clothing, was colored, and the inner layer worn like a shirt that was white. Okay, now the Gemara has finished this discussion, and it goes to the subject of doing things for Shabbos and Yom Kippur for each other, and we'll also discuss Shabbos and Yom Tov. So the halachas are as follows. We're referring to when you brought a carbon on one day and you didn't finish sacrificing, bringing all the fats on the mizbeach on that day, can you do it the next day? So the halacha would be as follows. If the next day is of a lesser holiness, then it's okay for that day to do things for the day earlier, because it's of a lesser holiness, so it's not a problem. If it is of a greater holiness or of an equal holiness, then it shouldn't be allowed to do that. So we had seen in our Mishnah that there was a machlokes between Shabbos and Yom Kippur. According to Rabbi Akiva, Shabbos and Yom Kippur are on the same level, and therefore you cannot bring the fats on the mizbeach for one day. For the previous day, doesn't matter which one is which. According to Rabbi Shmuel, however, Yom Kippur is on a lower level than Shabbos, and therefore if Shabbos was on, if Yom Kippur was on a Sunday, you could bring Shabbos fats on the mizbeach on Yom Kippur. The Gemara is also going to involve itself with the discussion of when we blew shofar and made Havdalah. Generally, shofar was blown on Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tov to tell people to stop doing malacha. So if you are going into a higher level, from a lower level Yom Tov to a higher level with more restrictions in malacha, then I could understand that you would blow shofar to tell people to stop doing those things that you could have done up till now. When you're coming out of one day to the next day, if you're going down from a higher level to a lower level, then you would say Havdalah. Because there is a level of Kedusha which is ending. If ever you're going up, you shouldn't say Havdalah. Okay, so that's where Shofar and Havdalah fit in. So now the Gemara will discuss all these things. Well, first of all, we're going to look for a source of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. So the Gemara says they both learn it out of the pasuk that says, Olas Shabbos b'Shabbatay. It's an extra pasuk that tells you each carbon's items, its fats and things should only be brought on that day and not on a different day. However, the whole pasuk is extra. That means it's including something and it's excluding something. It's including something because it's an extra pasuk. It's excluding something because it says b'Shabbatai, only on that specific day, not on a different day. So what's included, what's excluded? So Rabbi Akiva says Yom Tov is included. You're allowed to go from Shabbos to Yom Tov. You can bring Yom Tov fats on. You can bring Shabbos fats on Yom Tov because Yom Tov is clearly a lower level of Kedusha than Shabbos. But Yom Kippur you can't because Yom Kippur and Shabbos are the same. Now, Rabbi Yishmael says, no, you can go that Yom Kippur is lower than Shabbos, and therefore you can bring Shabbos fats on Yom Kippur, but not Yom Kippur fats on Shabbos. Okay, that's what's included, that's what's excluded according to each of them. The Gemara says that this really depends on the different machlokas they have about whether you're allowed to bring voluntary karbanos on Yom Tov or not. According to Rabbi Yishmael, you're allowed to bring karbanos on Yom Tov, even if you're not chayiv to. You're allowed to bring them. It's not chilul Yom Tov. Therefore, you would always be allowed to put fats on them as bayach. There's never any problem. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that. Therefore, the two psukim, one must be referring to Shabbos to Yom Kippur, and one for Yom Kippur to Shabbos. According to Rabbi Akiva, however, you can't just bring karbanos on Yom Tov if you're not supposed to, if you don't have to, and therefore you need a pasuk to tell me that you're allowed to bring those fats on Shabbos, from Shabbos to Yom Tov, and it's not referring to Yom Kippur and the context. Now the Gemara discusses the blowing of the shofar. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Zera said, when I was in Bavel and I heard the halacha that when Yom Kippur falls out on a Friday or a Sunday, by the way, in our days it could never because of the current calendar, but in the days where they set the months by seeing the moon, so it could fall out any day. So if Yom Kippur falls on a Friday or on a Shabbos, you don't blow shofar from Yom Kippur to Shabbos, and you don't make Havdalah from Shabbos to Yom Kippur, because the level of Kedusha is equal. There's no reason, there isn't anything that's now forbidden or anything that's now permitted that wasn't before, obviously except for eating, but as far as malacha. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Zera says, I thought that was according to all opinions. But when I came to Eretz Yisrael, Shimon ben Pazi was saying that no, it's only according to Rabbi Akiva, who says that they have the same level of Kedusha. But according to Rabbi Yishmael, Yom Kippur is lower level of Kedusha. If you're going straight from Yom Kippur into Shabbos, you should blow a shofar. That way you know that a higher level of Kedusha is approaching. And up till now, and therefore we should understand that Yom Kippur could bring the fats of Shabbos, and if it ever happened, Yom Kippur will be after Shabbos, we'll understand that you could bring fats from a carbon brought on Shabbos on Yom Kippur. That would be the significance of that. So he said, and I told him that you don't need to do that. You don't need to blow shofar to remind Kahanim of that, because Kahanim Mazrizim, Kahanim are very well versed in their halacha. They know exactly what to do. You don't need to tell them that. Gemara asks, Kahanim Mazrizim, you don't need to remind them things? What are you talking about? We know that we used to blow shofar in the Beis HaMikdash every Friday afternoon to remind people to stop doing their work. We had two separate sets of blowing 3 tikiyos each. One was to remind people that they should stop working, and one was to tell them that Shabbos has arrived and they're not allowed to do a malacha at all. So Gemara says that was for everybody else. It was in the Beis HaMikdash that everybody should hear, but it wasn't for the Kehanim. They themselves didn't need it. Similar to something which we saw elsewhere, that there was a golden candelabra which was hung over the Heichal. The sun would strike it and it would shine, and everybody could see the shine, and that would tell people that it was time for Shema. But that didn't apply to Kahanim, because Kahanim had to say Shema earlier, because they didn't want to miss Zman Kriyas Shema once they started doing the Avoda. Okay. Now there is another halacha which is certainly permitted on Yom Kippur, which is not permitted on Shabbos, and that is the halacha of Knivas Yerek. There is a special heter. It's permitted to cut up vegetables on Yom Kippur already from Mincha time. Even though it's still Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to eat anything, but you're allowed to cut the vegetables up then, preparing for after Yom Kippur when you're planning to eat them, or cook them, actually. So that's a special heter that you had on Yom Kippur. The Gemara will discuss if it applies to Yom Kippur, it falls on Shabbos, but it certainly doesn't apply to Shabbos itself. Can't cut up vegetables on Shabbos for after Shabbos. Now, the reason for this is a Machlokes Rishonim. Why was it permitted to cut up the vegetables? According to Rashi, it's to make it harder to fast. According to others, it's to make it easier to fast. But either way, the Gemara is asking now, you should therefore be blowing shofar when Yom Kippur falls on a Friday in order to show people that you're going to a higher level Kedusha so that they'll know that they're allowed to cut up the vegetables on Yom Kippur most days. Because it's a lower level Kedusha. So the Gemara says a few answers here why we don't blow shofar to teach that halacha about cutting up the vegetables. Again, the question is we should be blowing shofar on Yom Kippur afternoon when it's not a Friday to show that we're going into a higher level Kedusha of Shabbos in order that people should understand that Yom Kippur is a lower level Kedusha and they'll figure out that that's because of the heter to cut up the vegetables. So the Gemara says we don't do that. Few reasons. First of all, the Gemara says, Yosef says, because you don't blow shofar to teach you that something is mutter. You blow shofar to teach you that something is forbidden. Rashish Beit Avidi says, no, you could blow shofar to teach you that something is mutter, but in this case, it wouldn't be mutter then. Because on Friday, when Yom Kippur's on a Friday, you can't cut up the vegetables because you can't cook them that night, because that night is Shabbos. You can't cook on Shabbos. So this is for a different year that you would be learning this halacha. Okay, for a far-off heter, for a different year, that we don't blow shofar for. The Gemara says it's not true. The first reason is the right reason. It shouldn't make a difference whether it's long-term heter or short-term, or a short heter, one that applies now or one that only applies later. Because we see a mission which says that when Yom Tov falls out on a Sunday, you don't blow shofar from Shabbos into Yom Tov in order to teach that you're allowed to shecht and cook now, because we don't blow shofar to teach a heter. And this would apply immediately. So obviously the issue is that we never blow shofar to teach that something's permitted. We only blow shofar to teach that something is becoming forbidden, and it wouldn't make a difference if it's now or if it only applies in future years. Gemara now asks, what is actually the halacha about cutting up vegetables on Yom Kippur that falls on Shabbos? Now, there's a special heter to cut up the vegetables on Yom Kippur altogether, because it should be forbidden to do things on Yom Kippur to prepare for after Yom Kippur. They made a special heter because of the fast, either to make it easier or to make it harder, depending who you hold like. Now the question is, did they make the heter on Shabbos also? Or is the fact that Shabbos is forbidden to prepare for after the fast, did that make it forbidden when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos? So the Gemara says the machlokes between Rabbi Zera and Rav Huna, or possibly Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna, against Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Zera, or Rabbi Abba said it's forbidden, and then Rabbi Yechanan said it's permitted. Now we have Mishnayos on each side. There's a Mishnah that says, how do you know that it's forbidden to cut up vegetables on Yom Kippur that falls on Shabbos? Because it says Shabbosoin Shabbos. Extra phrase, Shabbosoin Shus, that it's forbidden. Now, the Gemara says that Mishnah clearly says it's forbidden to cut up, but what was it referring to? That means cutting up means cutting off the ground? That can't mean that, because that's a Malacha D'Oraisa. I don't need a Mishnah to tell me that. So it must be referring to already picked vegetables and you're cutting them up for a salad or to cook. Rabbi Yechanan says, no, the Mishnah is referring to a situation where it's referring to all still growing from the ground, and it's telling you that there's an extra Isser is an Isser Asay. It says you should rest on Shabbos. It's an extra Asay, an Isser Asay, besides for the fact that it's a Malacha and it's forbidden. Now the Gemara quotes a Brisa that actually supports Rabbi Yechanan. The Brisa says that on Yom Kippur, which falls on Shabbos, you're allowed to cut up vegetables, and you're allowed to crack nuts, and you're allowed to peel pomegranates, all in order to make, because of the fast, either to make it easier or harder, depending which reason you hold like. The Gemara says that in the house of Rabbi Yehuda they would cut up cabbages, in the house of Rabbah they would peel pumpkins, but Rabbah saw that they were starting too early, and it was before Mina Mincha, and therefore he wanted to say that the whole thing was forbidden, but he was afraid if he told them now that it's forbidden, they would not believe him. So he said, we got a letter from Rabbi Yechanan that it is forbidden to do it, and therefore we should stop doing it. That's the end of Parak Elu Kisharim, and it's a few lines into the next.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.